I remember the exact words. My husband looked at me with that cold, smug grin and said, "You will have to beg me, even for tampon money. Forget about your credit cards." My hands froze, my stomach twisted. I could feel the fury building inside me like a storm ready to explode. I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. I could either stay small, humiliated, trapped in his control, or I could fight back. What I did next would haunt him forever. But little did he know his own arrogance was about to become his undoing. My name is Melissa. I am 28 years old. I never imagined that I would feel trapped in my own home, like a stranger in the life I built with someone I once loved. My husband, David, seemed perfect to everyone else. Handsome, charming, ambitious. But behind closed doors, he was a storm of control and cruelty, and I was the target. The first time I realized that he thrived on dominating me, I laughed it off, thinking it was a joke. But the laughter died in my throat the night he told me I would have to beg for tampon money. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My face flushed with embarrassment. My hands trembled. He did not even flinch. He smirked, as if he had just delivered the funniest line in the world. I lived in a modern apartment downtown, all glass and steel, but it felt cold and suffocating. Each room reflected his personality, organized, pristine, rigid. My own things felt out of place, like I did not belong. I worked full-time at a marketing firm, trying to build a career, earn my independence, and yet every paycheck was scrutinized, every purchase questioned. He controlled everything, from what I wore to what I ate, from the groceries I could buy to the friends I could see. I remember hiding the little money I had, hoping he would not notice, because even my most basic needs became a battlefield. He would host friends and family, the perfect husband in public, charming and witty. But when the door closed, he would unleash a quiet cruelty that left me frozen in disbelief. One night, as I poured wine into glasses for his friends, he whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "She cannot even manage a credit card without my permission." I felt every nerve in my body tense. Anger, humiliation, and fear mingled, and I swallowed hard. I wondered if anyone would ever notice how small he made me feel. I wondered if anyone would ever see the woman I truly was. It was not just about the money. It was about power, about control, about the way he made me question my worth every single day. He dismissed my opinions, mocked my choices, and treated my attempts at independence like a joke. I began to dread even walking into a room he was in. I felt the walls of our apartment closing in, suffocating me, reminding me that I had no voice here, no freedom, no choice. And yet, deep inside, I felt a quiet ember burning. It was tiny at first, just the smallest spark of defiance. A whisper in my mind that I was not powerless. The tension escalated in ways that I could not predict. One morning, I went to the kitchen to find that he had thrown out the groceries I bought for myself, claiming they were unnecessary. I could feel my heartbeat hammering against my ribcage, my stomach twisting in a mixture of disbelief and rage. He glanced at me as if expecting me to beg, to apologize, to accept his authority. I did not. I turned away, silently plotting. Something had shifted inside me. The Melissa who had once smiled politely, who had tried to accommodate his every whim, was gone. In her place, there was a version of me that would no longer submit without a fight. I started noticing his patterns, the way he reveled in small victories over me, the way he underestimated me in every interaction. Every time he looked at me with that smug expression, I felt the ember inside flare brighter. I imagined what it would feel like to turn the tables, to see the arrogance drain from his face. The thought was intoxicating, and yet I had to be careful. Any misstep, any hint that I was planning something, would make him tighten his grip even more. The stakes were high. My pride, my dignity, my sanity, everything depended on my next moves. The injustice of his control was unbearable. But it also planted the seed of something powerful. A plan, a quiet, simmering revenge that would make him pay for every insult, every humiliation, every time he made me feel invisible. Little did he know his own arrogance was laying the groundwork for his downfall. Every word he spoke, every action he took, every attempt to belittle me brought me closer to the moment when I would reclaim everything he had stolen from my hand. More. If you have ever felt belittled, controlled, or disrespected, hit that like button and subscribe. This is the story of how I turned humiliation into power, and how justice can feel sweeter than anyone expects. The tension in our apartment grew thicker with each passing day. David's control became more brazen, more suffocating. It was not just about the money anymore. It was about proving every single day that I was beneath him, that my needs, my feelings, my voice did not matter. I felt like I was trapped in a game where every move I made could be twisted against me. I could feel my patience thinning, stretched tighter with every insult he tossed casually over dinner, every mocking glance across the room. One evening, I decided to cook his favorite meal, thinking perhaps some gesture of normalcy would soften him. I spent hours preparing it, carefully arranging each dish, imagining him being impressed, even grateful. When he walked into the kitchen, he did not even glance at the table. He leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, and without looking up, said, "You spent how long on this?" I could just order takeout and it would be the same. My hands trembled, my chest tightened, and I felt a rush of fury mixed with humiliation. I wanted to shout, to slam the dishes to the floor, to make him understand just once what it felt like to be ignored, to be dismissed, to be nothing. And yet, I held my tongue. I smiled politely, nodding, while a plan began to form in my mind, a quiet, calculated response that would not just retaliate but expose him completely. I realized that David thrived on my visible reactions, on my visible pain. If I wanted to take back control, I would need patience, cunning, and timing. Every insult he threw at me, every slight, every cruel joke became fuel for a storm I was preparing. He began scrutinizing everything I did, from the groceries I bought to the clothes I wore. One day, I came home with a small bouquet of flowers for myself. He glared at me and said, "You wasted money on this? Really? Do you know how much we have to save?" I felt my stomach, not my blood, boiling, but instead of arguing, I simply placed the flowers in the vase and walked away. I could hear him muttering behind me, his voice dripping with superiority. Every single word, every single gesture was a reminder that he believed he could break me completely. His friends became unwitting participants in his games. When they visited, he would make subtle jabs about my competence, my independence, my appearance. One night he laughed openly while telling a story about me failing to manage a household bill. I could feel my face burning, my hands clenched, but inside a quiet, cold calculation took over. I knew that this moment, this humiliation, was setting the stage for something much bigger. Sleep became difficult. Every night I would lie awake, listening to the apartment settling, imagining scenarios, analyzing patterns. I noticed the arrogance in his voice, the way he assumed I could not possibly act without his permission. I noted how predictable he was in front of others, how carefully he curated his image. His overconfidence, I realized, was a weapon if I could strike at the right moment. It would be devastating. The more he pushed, the more audacious he became, the more I felt the ember inside flare into a fire I could no longer ignore. I stopped pretending to be meek. I began small acts of rebellion, subtle assertions of independence while continuing to appear compliant. Each small act made him slightly uncomfortable, though he did not yet know why. And the worst part was the constant mental toll. I felt like a caged animal, pacing, planning, imagining every possible reaction, every possible outcome. And yet, every time he thought he had one, every time he believed he had broken me, I felt my resolve solidify. I would not be small. I would not be silent. I would find a way to turn this entire dynamic upside down, and he would see, finally, that control was an illusion he had mistaken for power. Little did he know, every cruel word, every petty insult, Every attempt to diminish me was being recorded in my mind like a blueprint. I was learning him, understanding him, preparing for the moment when all of his arrogance, all of his control would be his undoing. And I knew that moment was coming soon. It was a Thursday evening, gray clouds pressing against the windows, rain tapping a steady rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. David had refused me yet again, this time for something so small, so basic a bottle of pain relief I needed. I could feel my hands shaking, my stomach knotting, my pulse hammering in my temples. He leaned back on the couch, scrolling through his phone, completely indifferent to my suffering. I wanted to scream, to throw the bottle at him, to make him see the humiliation he forced me to endure. But instead, I stood there, silent, my body rigid with anger and disbelief. I realized in that moment that I could no longer exist in this cycle of control and submission. The Melissa who had swallowed her pride, who had bent herself into polite compliance, was gone. She had been replaced by someone sharper, colder, more deliberate. Someone who would no longer be treated as an accessory to his ego. I paced the living room, listening to the rain, feeling it pound against the windows as if the weather itself was urging me to act. I began to replay every insult, every joke, every time he had made me feel small. A montage of humiliation played in my mind, each scene fueling a resolve I had never felt before. The quiet ember of defiance I had been nurturing for months had become a roaring fire. I would not merely survive this marriage. I would reclaim my dignity, my independence, my power. I started to observe him more closely, noticing the patterns in his arrogance. He believed he was untouchable in front of friends and family, that his charm and public persona could mask his cruelty. Every boast, every smirk, every dismissive glance was a clue, a weakness I could exploit. And as I cataloged his behavior in my mind, a plan began to take shape, precise and deliberate, like a chess game where every move had a purpose. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the rain drumming against the glass like a countdown. I imagined the look on his face when he realized he no longer had control. I imagined the satisfaction, the sweet, undeniable triumph of turning all his tactics back on him. And I felt a thrill that was equal parts fear and exhilaration. I knew that the moment to act had to be perfect. One misstep, one premature reveal, and his grip on me would tighten again. But patience, I told myself, would be my ally. The more I reflected, the more I understood the scope of what I had endured. It was not just about money or groceries or petty insults. It was about the constant erosion of my autonomy, the deliberate stripping away of confidence and self-worth. I realized that anger alone was not enough. I needed strategy, precision, and timing. I needed to hit him where it would hurt most: his pride, his ego, his belief that he could dominate me without consequence. And then I had a moment of clarity. This was not simply about revenge. This was about reclaiming my life. Every decision I had made, every compromise I had accepted, had led to this point. I would no longer allow fear or shame to dictate my actions. I would no longer wait for him to grant me permission to exist fully, to exist freely. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clenched, my mind racing. I could feel the storm inside me, ready to explode, but I knew I had to channel it. I began to visualize the steps, the subtle manipulations, the carefully timed exposures that would unravel him completely. Every humiliating incident he had ever inflicted became a building block for the moment when he would finally understand that control is an illusion. By the time the clock struck midnight, I had made a silent vow. I would not beg, I would not plead, and I would not submit. The Melissa who had been trapped, dismissed, and humiliated was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to take back everything that had been stolen. A woman who would make sure he felt the full weight of his arrogance and cruelty. The first move would come soon, and when it did, he would never see it coming. I began quietly. That was the most important part. Silence was my shield. If David sensed even a hint of resistance, he would tighten his grip, so I smiled more. I spoke less. I moved carefully, like someone walking across thin ice, knowing one wrong step could crack everything. Inside, though, my mind was racing, mapping every detail, every opportunity. The first step was financial independence, not dramatic, not reckless, strategic. I opened a separate account using a small amount of money I had hidden over months. Each deposit felt like a heartbeat of freedom. I did it during lunch breaks, my palms sweating as I typed numbers into the machine, my breath shallow as if I were committing a crime. In a way, I was. I was stealing back my power. At home, I played my role perfectly. When he asked about expenses, I shrugged. When he mocked my dependence, I lowered my eyes. He mistook my calm for submission. That was his greatest mistake. Every time he smirked, I felt stronger. Every time he dismissed me, my resolve sharpened. I started gathering evidence. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just truth. Screenshots of his messages, notes of his comments, dates, times, patterns. The way he spoke to me in private versus the way he presented himself in public. The more I documented, the clearer everything became. This was not just cruelty. It was a system, a performance. And I was about to rewrite the script. I watched how much he valued his image, how he straightened his posture when guests arrived, how his voice softened when he wanted admiration. His ego was a fragile thing disguised as confidence, and fragile things break the loudest. The next step was timing. I needed witnesses. People whose opinions mattered to him. People whose silence would make the truth echo even louder. He was planning a small dinner gathering, just friends and a few coworkers. He was excited, proud, already rehearsing how impressive he would appear. I nodded and helped him plan, hiding the tremor in my hands. The night of the dinner, the apartment glowed with warm light. Candles flickered. Soft music filled the air. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I moved through the room like an actress taking her marks. Every step deliberate, every smile practiced. He was in his element, laughing, storytelling, commanding attention, and then, as always, he began. "She does not even have her own cards," he joked lightly. "I have to manage everything for her." Laughter followed, polite, uncertain. My stomach tightened. This was the moment. Not yet, but soon. I placed the wine glasses down slowly, feeling the cool glass against my fingertips. My voice, when I spoke, surprised even me. Calm, steady, clear. "That is interesting," I said. Since I have been managing my own finances for months now, the room shifted. Not silence yet, just confusion. Eyes turned toward me. Toward him. He laughed. "What are you talking about?" I met his gaze. Did not blink. I opened my own account. I pay my own expenses. I keep records. I just did not think it was necessary to announce it. His smile faltered, just slightly, but I saw it. The crack continued slowly, each word chosen like a blade. "I also keep records of the things you say. The way you speak to me, the way you present our relationship. They are very different versions of you." The air grew heavy. Someone shifted in their seat. Someone else cleared their throat. David tried to recover. "You are exaggerating." "No," I said quietly. "I am finally being precise." My hands were trembling, but my voice did not waver. I felt heat rush through my body, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was it. The line had been crossed. There was no turning back. I did not need to shout. I did not need to insult him. The truth did the work for me. His posture collapsed slightly. His eyes darted around the room. He was searching for control and finding none. And in that moment, I knew something profound had changed. The power dynamic had shifted. The story he told about me, about us, about himself, was unraveling in real time. This was only the beginning. The moment arrived faster than I expected. The room felt charged. the soft music now a distant hum beneath the tension crackling between us. David's smile had vanished. Every confident gesture, every practiced joke, every mask he had worn in front of our friends and coworkers was gone, replaced by something raw, something vulnerable. I could feel it. The control he had wielded for months, years even, was slipping through his fingers like sand. I took a slow breath, letting my eyes sweep across the room. Each glance, each subtle reaction from our guests added weight to the moment. The anticipation was almost unbearable, but I refused to rush. Timing had been everything, and the timing had come. "You seem surprised," I said quietly, my voice steady, almost soft. "You always brag about how much control you have, how easily you manage me. And yet here we are." He tried to smile, but it faltered, shaky and unconvincing. "I do not know what you are talking about," he muttered, his eyes darting nervously. I held up a folder, a thick collection of screenshots, dates, notes, and receipts. I had spent months quietly collecting evidence, documenting every insult, every slight, every attempt to humiliate me. The air in the room grew heavier as I placed it on the table, opening it to reveal the patterns of his arrogance. "Do you see this?" I asked, letting my gaze linger on his. "All of it. Everything you have done, every word, every action, your little jokes, your control, your assumptions about me, they are all here, for everyone to see." The laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone. Eyes widened, whispers rose, and David's posture stiffened, his chest tightening with something I had only ever glimpsed in private fear. He searched for an explanation, a deflection, anything to regain footing, but there was none. "You are lying," he said, voice tight. "This is not true." I shook my head slowly, savoring the moment. "It is all true. And you have no one to blame but yourself." He looked around, desperate, trying to find an ally in the room. Friends exchanged glances, some shocked, some quietly impressed. The realization that his public persona meant nothing in the face of the truth was crushing him. I could see it in the way his hands trembled slightly, the way his jaw clenched. "You thought you could humiliate me, control me, strip away my independence," I continued, my voice rising just enough to carry across the table. "But you underestimated me. You always underestimate me." A pause. The room held its breath. I could feel my own heart pounding, adrenaline and satisfaction mixing in a dizzying rush. Relief was flooding through me. Every insult, every slight, every humiliation I had endured months ago seemed insignificant now, replaced by triumph. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but the words faltered. I leaned forward slightly, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the full weight of his failure, of his arrogance, of his own undoing. "You will remember this," I said quietly. "Not just today, but every time you thought you had power over someone else. Control is a fleeting illusion, and arrogance always leaves a trail." I stood fully now, letting the power in my stance fill the room. David slumped in his chair, defeated, exposed, humiliated. He had been undone not by shouting, not by rage, but by precision, by calm, by the undeniable truth of my resilience. And I felt it, the release I had been craving for months. The validation, the quiet, burning joy of knowing that justice finally had been served. The storm inside me settled, leaving clarity, pride, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. I had reclaimed everything, my dignity, my independence, my voice. And the look on his face told me, more than words ever could, that he knew it. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment I had dreamed of, and it was perfect. The days after the dinner were strangely quiet. David retreated into himself, his arrogance stripped bare, leaving only the man I had always known behind the carefully constructed mask. I watched him shrink under the weight of his own actions, no longer able to command attention or mock with impunity. And I realized, with a clarity I had never felt before, that revenge is not about cruelty. It is about reclaiming your life, your dignity, your voice. I spent hours walking through the city streets alone, feeling the rain soak through my coat, the cold seeping into my bones. And yet I felt warmth inside, a fire that no one could extinguish. Each step echoed the choices I had made. Each puddle reflected the strength I had discovered. I no longer feared confrontation. I no longer doubted myself. The humiliation I had endured had been transformed into power. I carried it like armor. Looking back, I could see the patterns that had trapped me. And I understood that I had learned the hardest lessons in the most painful ways. Control is seductive, but it is never absolute. Arrogance is loud, but it is fragile. And people who diminish others to feed their own egos will eventually reveal the weaknesses they try to hide. I felt gratitude, strangely, not for his cruelty, but for the clarity it had given me. I had survived it, and in surviving, I had grown stronger than I had ever imagined. Friends and colleagues noticed the change in me almost immediately. I spoke with more confidence, I moved with more assurance, and I no longer allowed subtle dismissals or condescending remarks to affect me. I had discovered something that David could never take away: my autonomy, my strength, my self-worth, and it was intoxicating. I thought about the concept of karma, and I could not deny its presence. He had invested so much energy in controlling me, belittling me, convincing himself of my dependence. And yet, all of that effort, all of that energy, had only set the stage for his downfall. I did not have to plan every detail to teach him a lesson. His own arrogance had done much of the work. And still, the satisfaction of witnessing it unfold, of seeing him exposed, was beyond what I had imagined in my quietest dreams. I also reflected on forgiveness, and I realized that it was not necessary for me. This was not about sparing him, about absolving him, or about maintaining any illusion of peace between us. It was about truth, justice, and closure. It was about me reclaiming my life from the shadow he had cast over it. And now that I had done so, the weight lifted. The fear, the resentment, the constant anxiety was all gone. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild, to reimagine my future. Small victories became larger ones. I opened doors I had once feared to approach, spoke my mind without hesitation, and made choices based on my own desires rather than anyone else's control. The apartment, once a cage, became my sanctuary. The routines that had felt suffocating became rituals of freedom and self-affirmation. I realized that strength does not come from avoiding hardship. It comes from facing it, understanding it, and using it to define yourself rather than allowing it to define you. I was no longer the woman who bent under control. I was the woman who had endured, calculated, and emerged unbroken, unstoppable, and free. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. If this story inspired you, smash that like button. Share your own story of standing up for yourself in the comments, and subscribe for more gripping tales of resilience, empowerment, and justice. Remember, your strength is yours. Never let anyone take it away.